All right. Well, just thank everybody for that. I think we had some really great ideas that came out of that, and I will round those up. I'll just close this portion by thanking everyone and saying if you have continued interest in seeing some of these things through, feel free. You can get my contact information off the website, the Access Management website, and feel free to reach out and let me know your interest. We're always looking for help to further these research ideas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad Strader.
All right, so you've learned a lot about access management and what's been going on in the research and histories and examples and so forth, and hopefully you found that beneficial. This is kind of a closing session just on what is the future of access management. What do we need to be thinking about in the future? So we've just talked about research needs that we have. It's just future manuals that are coming out, some in the near future, some things we need farther off in the future. But as we take a look at the next 5 and 10 years, as Bob Fasek has always told me, be thinking ahead. So as we think ahead in access management and our professions and what we're doing and the guidance we need to give to our officials, what is the future? So we've got a distinguished panel here. They've all been presenters already, so I'm going to just give a brief introduction, or I guess I'll let them introduce themselves real briefly. They're going to give 3 to 4 minutes on what they see as the future of access management, and then I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the panel. I was hoping that there'd be a table here and we'd have a bottle of scotch or bourbon and enjoy but it's not quite noon, so I was told in Wisconsin you don't do that. But if this is in Michigan, where I'm from, we would be toasting while we are doing this and kind of eavesdropping into a living room discussion, because when this group gets together for fun, all they talk about is access management. So maybe we'll start with Mike Roach. Mike is from Wisconsin DOT and is the statewide manager of access management for about 10 years, and he's worked with Rhinelander and Green Bay and the main office, and every time they think he's in one office, he says he's in another, so we don't really know where Mike is most of the time. But Mike, we'll start it off with you and then go down the row.
Everybody know how to turn this on?
Take this one.
1, 2. The guy in the back's got to turn it on. Is it live yet? Yep.
Hello? Like Brad said, I'm the access engineer, statewide access engineer for Wisconsin, and I want to thank everybody again for coming and thank the hotel. Make sure you do that on your way out. Thank these folks, thank Ben Jordan and all that have been involved here, because it's been great to see all the experts come together, talk about the future of access management. It was really hard to make a lot of decisions on what sessions you wanted to go to, because all these folks intimidate the heck out of me because they know a lot more than I do. But that's why we come to these things, so we can see. If I'm supposed to talk about the future and what I think access management is, I was just talking to Mark. You know, you look at things. If you were a builder, when plywood first came, we said that would never happen, right? And Peck's Plumbing, and maybe you remember the guy who invented the telephone, the bell. He said there'll probably be one of these in every major city. When the horse and buggy left, you know, they're telling us about cars. When Ford built the first car, he kept it in a garage. So it's hard to visualize. Yesterday or the day before, they said 2053 before we see these AV cars. If I see that, and I see it as nobody's driving cars anymore. It's like that in Chicago when I visit my cousin. We go down there and he doesn't have a car. It blows me away. I got to have 4 cars where I live. You got to have a truck, you got to have a 4-wheel drive, you got to have a van. I got to have all this stuff. And in Chicago, you don't need a car. You're foolish to have one because you get around different ways. So eventually, if I see everybody with these automated cars, that curbside is really become important if that car is going to keep looping around until I get to where I want to go. Access management becomes real relevant, right? Because if these cars aren't going to hit anything, they're going to be stopped and slowing down all the time. How many of you are driving on a highway and you're in a hurry and it's snowing? Probably not many from the south, but I leave from Madison here, and I'm in a hurry to get home, and I'm going way faster than I'm comfortable, and I might be going 45, and it's snowing hard, and people are flying by me going 60, and then you see them up in the ditch. What in the heck, I'm thinking, are those folks going to do when they're autonomous vehicles? They aren't going to get that guy there in time, right? And they're already in a hurry. So we need to really focus on access management, maybe in a different light, different research, for what's going to be here in 20, 30, 40 years. It's hard to do, but I think that's where our focus should be.
Thank you. So I'm Karen Dixon. I'm a senior researcher and Grand Poobah at Texas A&M Transportation Institute. Okay, they didn't give me the Grand Poobah title. That's my own. But I do enjoy doing a lot of research, and so I've tried to look at this through the lens of the researcher. Before I talk about what I think the future looks like, I just would point out that if Ford invented the first car and he garaged it, does that mean he invented the first garage too? I'm just trying to put those pieces together. All right, so when I was...
That's where he had his tractor.
Oh, yeah, there you go. The tractor came before the car? Okay. So when they asked me what's the future look like, I thought, well, what would a perfect future look like? I always like to start there. Then, of course, you're disillusioned a little bit. But so for me, a perfect future would be a fully integrated, access management would be fully integrated into the design and planning process. It wouldn't be an afterthought, which often it is, or it wouldn't be a struggle, which often it is. The perfect future, the state DOT, the municipalities, and the landowners would all agree. I know this is crazy talk, isn't it? But I think that it's important that they understand that the benefits for one are the same as the benefits for the other. I also think that a perfect future, the access management priorities would always be balanced with mobility, access, safety, and the user needs. And sometimes we compromise that balance. It shifts the balance because we give favor to one over the others. And I think that's important. A perfect future would have innovative vehicle and road designs that work together to reduce challenges and optimize performance. And because I'm a researcher, a perfect future, of course, would continue to provide great research opportunities. That's a given. So I was telling some folks this morning at breakfast, I had this list yesterday, and then I ended up tearing it up because I thought, none of this can be achieved. Visually imagine me tearing this up again because I know none of it can be achieved, but I do have two or three things that I think are possible for the future. And one is, I think our professions can continue to work hard to achieve access management objectives, and that's the only way we're going to make advances, is that our profession continues with our dedication that we have. The goal will be to have access for all users, not just a subset of the users, and I think that that's something that will make a successful future of access management. And then, of course, more research opportunities. It's always going to be there, so more research opportunities.
Well, I'm going to be a little more pessimistic here because, as some of you who are there for session 67, Ernie, my attorney, from South New Jersey. But let me throw some numbers at you. I sort of look in the future. What's going to be in the future to help motivate us to do something today? So I'm still looking at the future. But there's 30,000 people out there that are going to die in the next 10 years in access-related accidents. 30,000 people who don't know they're going to be dead. And I just find that interesting. So, it backs up to what we're doing. What can we do to help address that? So in 10 years from now, everybody's in a better position and there's not as much activity in that area. 9 million are going to be involved in access-related accidents in the next 10 years. What can we do about that? What can we do now? Not tomorrow, the next day, but what do we do now so that number is lower in the future? I'm hoping courts will start recognizing the grandfather clause, following up with what we had in our legal session this morning. The grandfather clause does not protect the property owner. And I'm very interested in see how that's going to play out here with the more attorneys getting involved in terms of injuries and fatalities and those kinds of things. I think, I'm hoping the courts will recognize that governmental immunity does not apply, does not protect the state when permits, when we issue permits as a hazard in the right-of-way, like a driveway permit is. I like to, more and more, I get around to a lot of different states, and I'm watching what they're doing in terms of standards, and more states are using functional area of the intersection, which is interesting, because that's what the attorney is focusing on in terms of how do we protect the functional area of an intersection. So I think that's going to be, on terms of roadway design, it's going to be much higher, more interest. How do we calculate that? How do we figure it out? And for you that do permits, how do we keep people out of the functional area of the intersection, where every convenience store, Walmart, not Walmart, but Walgreens convenience store, and all those other people want to, gather on the corners of our intersections. And I think we'll see more lawsuits like the one that Ernie Alvino mentioned. I think the trial lawyers are just starting to understand that there's an opening in this area for non-conforming hazardous, and we'll have access issues in court, which is going to be very interesting. I think it'll help balance things out. But I still think, as we all are disappointed in, our legislature will continue to deny agencies the authority to implement access management for safety, so that abutting businesses can have more convenient yet hazardous driveways. And one of the themes that I've been pushing with my clients over the last 5 years now is retail is only one small part of the business community. In terms of the economic engines that say drive Wisconsin, you've got freight, you've got commodities, you've got industry, you've got movement of raw materials to industry, you've got movement of finished product out of industry to the ports. We're talking about a global economy. We're talking about point of sale price. And if we can't keep transportation costs low and have good mobility for industry and farmers and products from where they generate them to where they're getting them going, they're not going to be able to compete globally. So if we have retailers that, I need another signal, I need 5 driveways, they're stabbing themselves in the foot. Because if people aren't employed with good money and don't have fat wallets, it doesn't matter how many driveways you have, they don't have enough money to come in and buy whatever you're selling. So the biggest economic engine for a state is production. How raw materials get into where they're worked on, whether it's food products or whatever, or major industry, car parts, you name it, and how does it get out? And if we complete globally, how does it get from an industry out to the port? How does it get to an airplane? How does it ship to China? How does it ship overseas? Oh, wait a minute, we got tariffs, don't we? Oh, never mind. So I'd encourage you all in the future to start thinking in terms of, and when you're trying to sell this, market it, explain it, the economy of your state depends on production and use of goods and materials, and retail is a small sector. And retail, I think it's a conspiracy for retail. Retail is probably one of the biggest beneficiaries of good access management, because it means a bigger market area, and it means more people have a fatter wallet, which will spend more money at your gas station, spend more money at your convenience store. And so our job is to promote economic development, and I really think that's what access management does. We just have to figure out a way to sell it and hopefully get people to buy it, and not be so myopic to think that the only thing that matters is whether a retailer has 1 driveway or 2 driveways. It's a much bigger picture than that. We've got to figure out a way to really sell that issue over the next couple of years.
Again, my name is Kristine Williams, and I'm going to approach this through the lens of a land use and transportation policy person and a planner, and look at this from a planning and policy context. And we've been thinking about the future of transportation for Florida DOT in terms of the Florida Transportation Plan, and looking out in the next 50 years. And I'm thinking, what is it going to take to create a more resilient transportation system that will let us address that uncertain future? We have uncertainty in technology and disruptive technology. We have changes in the environment, changes in demographics and travel behavior. We also, the economy is changing, a globalization of the economy, e-commerce and real-time delivery, and all of these issues, automated vehicles. So one of the things, I can see access management, we're going to have a continued advancement of these system-wide programs at the state level and local level. Also a real need for integrated corridor management and a broader range of land use and transportation strategies to manage those corridors. And within all of this is really good network planning, and how do we get there? Because to me, the big challenge in access management is how do we get local governments and the private sector to build the network that is essential to good, and we saw this earlier in one of the presentations, good circulation. It gets us to all of our goals, livable, walkable communities. We have an obesity epidemic in the US. People don't walk anymore because they can't. So accessibility of the built environment is another area, I think, of importance. And in all of this, I see the states having a real leadership role, because who is it that would be the leader on these topics? It's the state transportation agencies. You have a real need to engage in land use and network planning. And so it's going to come through the thoroughfare planning at the local level, and the MPOs also have a important role in all of this. And so some of the things that we're also going to need to be doing is fixing what we have, right? Retrofitting our system, starting to go out there and get rid of those driveways that are excessive to the system as we're shifting to a really effective circulation and network plan. States have a big role in doing that, as well as how can we get better funding to bridge those gaps in the local network off the corridor. And so moving ahead, those are some of the issues that I see as important.
Is this thing working?
I can hear you fine.
All right. Well, this is working here. Okay. Yeah. I'm not pessimistic about access management. I am very optimistic about access management. The Highway Safety Manual, a lot of the new things that are coming out from the research showing over and over again how good access management is. In addition to that, I have seen a real improvement in the access desires of our enlightened large developers. They know that good access management is good for them. You know, we love showing these pictures in our training of the old style gas station with 4 driveways, sometimes 6 driveways. There's not that many of them anymore, at least that I know of. When I was a kid, you couldn't drive more than 2 miles and there'd be a gas station. The whole industry has changed. Gas stations are not as much convenience anymore as they are real destinations for people, maybe on the way to and from work, but they are destinations. Like a certain kind of coffee, people are going to find their way to these stores. So I am not pessimistic at all, but we do need some tweaking. We need some more education for those developers that are insisting on drive-throughs that hurt the accessibility to pedestrians, people with disabilities, and I think we need to tweak that also. I have a philosophical difference with a lot of people up here. I think the success of Florida's program, I'm not saying we're the greatest, but we don't let the driveways be the thing that we spend our times trying to close. They're extremely time consuming, extremely expensive. Use your authority to put medians into new roads. All those driveways, even the really ugly ones that you use, really don't have that much traffic on them. And if you can stop the left turns in and out, you have made that road much safer, and with a lot less headache than you trying to close a bunch of driveways which didn't have that much traffic on them to begin with. That's just my opinion. Then I have to admit the opening session exposed me to the automated vehicles and how great those will be, and the transportation network companies like Uber, and I think it'll make for a better world for most of us middle-income people. But I am only afraid that this is one more opportunity for us to leave poor people in the dust and to have even greater difference between the middle income and the wealthy and those people whose bicycles you see parked at the back of restaurants where they're working.
So I've spent virtually my entire life and career working in the Southeast, and so my view of access management through the work I do in planning and traffic engineering is a little bit different, because in most of the areas I've worked, back in the early and mid 90s, they built as much 5-lane road as they could put down in as fast a time as possible, because they just needed the capacity to keep pace with development. I grew up in Raleigh, and I can tell you that that was absolutely the trend in Raleigh for almost 20 years. They just couldn't get the lanes down fast enough, and 5-lane roads were less controversial and a lot cheaper to build, and so that's what they did. And same in Virginia where I live now, and I think what we're starting to see is states and localities that are now realizing the burden that is put on their system from a not just a safety standpoint, but also an operational standpoint. And we do an extraordinary amount in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina of retrofit projects to get rid of those two-way left turn lanes and come back with medians, but it's always a very tough fight, and it's always more complicated than it really should be, because when we, those of us in this room, certainly those of us up here, look at the data, it's a no-brainer. It's almost unfathomable that somebody would tell us not to put a median in, or not to restrict left turns or consolidate driveways, but we run into it all the time. And the really tough part is not so much the engineers or even the DOTs, it's really the elected officials and how we boil this information down to a understandable level that gets the point across. I think Phil's talked a little bit about this in the liability side, but we just haven't. I think the future really is one that sort of makes that transition to where the tools and techniques that we all take as commonplace and are commonplace for everybody, because we are consistently running up against a ever-changing landscape of needing to retrofit and also still balance the desires of local elected officials for economic development, and also to get reelected and not want to stick their neck out in terms of retrofit projects that are unpopular with people who don't want to change their travel patterns regardless of what we might tell them.
All right, so the advantage I get of moderating this session is I get to ask a couple questions that I have, and then we'll open it up to others. So sort of one of my ideas was to have autonomous vehicle presentation here, and some thought, why would you have that? But it's because I hear from people, why do we need access management anymore if there are going to be autonomous vehicles that are we won't need center turn lanes, they're going to maneuver, we don't have to worry about crashes, all the crashes will go away, thinking that it's imminent. And just a couple weeks ago, Bedrock, the largest mortgage company, I think, in the country, in downtown Detroit, started autonomous shuttles for their employees going from parking lots to their buildings and so forth. So it is, coming on, and we've got a lot of testing. We saw in the first presentation testing in this area. They're testing out on the roads in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and in Pittsburgh, and in the West Coast. So maybe a couple of you, with this future of autonomous vehicles, some of us are hearing, well, why do we need to worry about access management? Autonomous vehicles are coming. Some say sooner, some say 2053. What do you think is the future with autonomous vehicles, short and longer term? Mike kind of brought it up. Anybody else want to comment on the autonomous vehicle future?
Just a quick comment that occurs to me is that if you have fewer access points on these routes, you're going to have more curb for the AVs, for the delivery vehicles because of all the e-commerce and the need for the delivery vehicles to get in and out, and TNCs, the Uber and Lyft folks as well. So just an observation on my part.
Anyone else? Stuart?
Well, I think the quick answer to the need is because they're not here yet, and we don't know when they'll be here. And in the meantime, to Phil's point, people are being exposed to risk. And back to the work I'm doing on a lot of retrofit jobs, that risk isn't going away. We don't know when they're coming, and in the meantime, every year that passes that we don't get them and we maintain that risk is somebody's liable, financially or not. Somebody's gonna get killed, or multiple people will get killed, and we can't address something we don't know the future of when there's an issue now.
Anybody else? Mike?
I just want to say that if you have been following Hugo Joe's research on Wrongway entering of freeways, you will see right now the importance of access management for automated vehicles. Not that he used automated vehicles, but he did the testing of the GPS directions. And the more driveways there are around freeways, the greater chance for people going the wrong way. So
Touch on what I think Stuart might have said is there is a risk. There's a risk in what we're doing, but the good news is it jumps out at me. Again, I'll repeat, the speaker up here on Tuesday said there might be a problem with students once they figure out these cars stop. They're going to run out when they're late for class because they know they're not going to get injured. That really stuck with me. I thought, holy cow, what are we going to do? Where people start realizing these things don't hurt you. We talk about the driveway slowing autonomous cars down. You got to get rid of these driveways. They're going to see people slowing down where the drivers today go right around them. They see nobody. This car is probably going to go slow, and people are in a hurry today. So I think it's encouraging, though we're at a risk and we don't know what the future holds with these AV cars. What we do know is cutting access management and making it better drives mobility and safety. They go hand in hand, right? So I continue to tell people that work in the access management field, you can't stop people from texting and driving. You can give them fines. You can't stop girls from putting lipstick on. You can give them fines. You can shave in the car. But one thing you can control is where you put the driveway. And the data is pretty clear that every driveway is 9 conflict points. And people say that, there's never been a crash there, Mike, so that's why we can't. What we do know is the same thing with Chris Huffman uses that example of cigarettes cause cancer, but I can't tell you which cigarette's going to get you. Candy bars cause diabetes, and I can't tell you exactly. Driveways are no different. And so with these AV cars, my biggest thing is people aren't thinking how slow things will be if we got driveways along our corridors that we don't need. They got side road access, get them on the side roads. Get them out of the functional areas.
And kind of sticking with the safety theme, how many of you have heard the term Vision Zero used? Most of you. So the Institute of Transportation Engineers, their big audacious goal is Vision Zero. We're seeing more and more communities adopting Vision Zero strategies and so forth. And many of those that I look through don't really talk about access management as part of it. And Gary, you brought up in your presentation the tremendous increase in pedestrian fatalities, which is also, I think, been sort of overlooked in some of the access management discussions. So how do we make sure access management is integrated into Vision Zero, and why hasn't some of the firms doing Vision Zero, why hasn't that been included, and how do we make sure that that's recognized as an important part of the Vision Zero approach?
At Florida DOT, we are doing our best to incorporate access management into the Vision Zero and the safety plans of the department. I'm talking like I still work there, I'm retired. But a lot of it has to do probably with the fact that the people in our safety office are closely tied in with our access management and traffic operations people. And they read the highway safety manual and they understand the importance of medians.
I think maybe building on that, it's kind of an organizational and institutional thing, perhaps. Access is a land use issue to a large extent. And so the transportation agencies that don't have direct authority over land use sometimes kind of maybe find it more complicated of a strategy. But I have seen conflict management or reducing conflicts in the Vision Zero plans, which is access management. And so perhaps also it's just not directly mentioned as access management. And I'm more and more seeing it as part of complete streets and Vision Zero kind of things as well. So maybe it's being narrowed a little bit as a topic.
Just to kind of piggyback on what she said, the low-cost initiatives by the Federal Highway Administration, more than half of them are really access management measures. And the conflict analysis, that's an access issue. So I think probably what's happening is what we want to happen, which is access management is no longer its own little group of treatments, but they're being widely integrated into all the others. And so all the Vision Zero plans or efforts that I've seen in some way address safety in such a way that it does embrace access management without explicitly identifying it as access management. So even though it might be nice to give it its own individual nod, I appreciate the fact that it's at least recognized, and I think that it's not going to be left behind.
Great. All right, I've got other questions, but how about from the audience? Do we have any questions for our panel? You've heard sessions, you know, sometimes when you hear different sessions, you want something to be clarified or get inspired to go forward. Any questions from anybody out there? In the back? If we've got a mic. Is there a second mic?
Yeah, we
I'll go around. We'll just repeat the question.
Just curious, going back to the autonomous discussion a little bit, I've attended some webinars and then also gotten some presentations from consultants on projects that we've worked on. There aren't a lot of things that we can assume with autonomous. There's a lot of unanswered questions. We don't really know where it's going to go, what's going to happen, how things are going to get affected. But there seems to be an assumption out there that a lot of people are using is that it will mean less vehicles on the roadway. But I've heard other discussions where it could actually mean more vehicles because it'll be like the next latest and greatest laptop, next latest and greatest cell phone, and everyone's going to want one. They're probably going to want multiples. And if the technology advances and just for, commuting from work to home, it's maybe just a one-passenger vehicle, but then you want to go to the lake on the weekend, you need something to pull your boat. So it could end up with more vehicles. And I'm curious the group's thoughts on the stage on, it seems like there's one assumption being made and why that is and your thoughts on that.
So I'll start out till we get the mic back. So I've attended and been on panels in a lot of autonomous vehicles, partly because I'm from Detroit, and so it's a big topic. And I think the general consensus, but not everyone agrees, is that vehicle miles traveled will go up with autonomous vehicles based on some testing and modeling and so forth. And when people have had access to an autonomous vehicle, they tend to travel more, and the vehicles will be moving around. There's sort of two scenarios that they're looking at. One is continued ownership, that people will own their own vehicle, and the other is more shared ownership, or you don't own a car at all or a vehicle at all, and it's all out of a pool. And that's probably going to be a generational shift. That's probably more the 2053 shift. So I think you'll see incremental changes. I think the general feeling is people will go from 2 cars to 1 car. So they'll still have one vehicle of their own, but then when they need a car occasionally, that they might use the autonomous vehicle. I was at a ULI conference a few weeks ago, and they said, what are the industries that are going to be most affected? And they said one of those is self-storage, because people have less cars, their garages will become open for storage, and don't invest in the self-storage industry because it doesn't have a bright future. So nobody really knows, or a lot of consequences outside of the things that we're thinking about, such as that one. But I think that's the feeling, is gradually the ownership of a fleet will go down, and there'll be more pooling or shared vehicles, like an Uber Lyft kind of a situation. Anybody else want to?
Just a comment in that regard, because you do hear kind of heaven and hell scenarios with AVs, dramatically increasing urban sprawl as people get more comfortable, driving long distances to work, or they could, improve mobility in the urban areas and cause more compact urban growth. And this is the land use transportation kind of issue. And I guess my feeling on that is that as government agencies and servants of the public and researchers and universities, it's our obligation to use and shape technology to achieve public good. And so we set the policy. If we want safe and efficient systems, and we want to improve livable and walkable urban environments, all of those things. So rather than letting the technology shape us, let's take a leadership role in setting the policies and guiding toward the desired future.
This is perfect. I think to your specifically to the first part of your question about sort of how do we, I think on just a pure traffic engineering side, I think it's very likely that we will see VMT go up. At a bare minimum, I think as people have more mobility just through decades and centuries, the more mobility, the more travel. So that's just sort of a rule of thumb. But I think whether it's access management or just more broadly the whole industry, I think there needs to be a careful balance that we don't just assume that they're coming, because we don't know enough about when or what or how. And I think we need to, as Kristine said, I think it's important to shape that a little bit, but in the interim, I think if we just assume that there's a panacea future on the horizon that's going to solve these issues, I think history tells us that we are setting ourselves up for failure in the long run. And so I think you have to know what's coming and not be blind to it, but don't forget that it may never get where you think it's going to get.
I think some of the issues are going to change. So I heard it described in a survey I think MIT did. They asked people if you had access to an autonomous vehicle, would you use it more or less or the same? And they said less. And they said if you had access to a chauffeured car with the world's best driver, you could use it any time for anything you wanted, would you drive more, less, or the same? And they said more. So that would be the autonomous vehicle. So that's part of the sense of the VMT will go up. And then I've seen some images that someone put together. What happens if at 5 o'clock everybody gets out at WisDOT and all call their autonomous vehicles, and they're all going to arrive at the same time? How are we all going to get there? It's kind of like if you look at when school lets out and all the parents sort of line up. I remember seeing a video in Texas. All these parents are lined up, and they have to have this sophisticated system to gradually say which next 3 kids are in line so the cars can move forward, and very orchestrated. So some of our profession is probably going to change depending on how gradual and what happens. So we're going to have different issues to deal with, I think, in the future. Other questions? I guess I'll ask another one on one of the things we've heard a couple times at the conference in dealing with property owners and developers. Kristine, you had a session on working with businesses. So what can we do to help convince our elected officials to implement access management and to support us at the administrative level, at the elected official level? What are some things that we could be doing as individuals here to help overcome this idea that access management is anti-business, and whether it's putting in a median or trying to close a driveway? So what are some lessons that you can share with the audience here?
Can I start? I have a microphone. I'm going to start. That's why I got back to that. I agree 100%. We're all pushed on economic issues. How are you going to support the economy of, And that's why I just encourage all of you to think of all the ways that access management supports the economy. Think of freight, think of mobility, think of safety, think of, what is it in Wisconsin? Something like $6 billion in annual losses to crashes every year. I mean, it's a big drain on your economy. So all of us need to start thinking about economic effects of access management. Don't be scared about it. Don't think retail. Think of the bigger picture. Point of sale, supply chain issues. Look at your freight plan. Look at your master transportation plan, because all those things talk about the importance of transportation, and then link that to the economic vitality of your state. Employment, big business, how do you track industry? How do you track global industry to your state? Well, you promise them an efficient supply chain of raw materials, supply chain of labor, and a mobility, external mobility to get from your industry out to the nearest port or out to the point of sale. So start working on that and give yourself some good information that you can share when someone's pushing you in the opposite direction. Because I think access management is critical to economic development. Every country that is not very well developed, if you look at the countries, their transportation system usually sucks. And ours is going downhill, and part of access management is, besides all these construction activities, is to try to keep it going. And we're all being faced with, what can we do to get better performance out of what we have? I mean, you guys have all heard this. Tie it to economics, though. Not just the driveway and the retail, but the bigger economic picture. You're here to support the economic growth of the state of Wisconsin, and they should be very happy that you're helping.
So I'll touch on that because Phil shared a chart with me, and I'm sure he doesn't care if I just talk about it, but it was a state that had different business sectors. Their planning department put this together. They looked at the money coming into their state, and they said, how does this affect access management? And they looked at, I think it was 11 business sectors that bring economics to their state. And we know that we cater to, at least I know in Wisconsin, we seem to make poor decisions because of political pressure sometimes for retail businesses. And yet retail was a business sector that was down, I think it was number 4. It wasn't 1, it wasn't 2, and it wasn't 3.
It's Iowa. Iowa was the
Yeah, I didn't want
to
to say who it was. But I'll tell you what, number 1 might have been farming, it might be mining, but let's just say that it's something to do with like a FedEx company who doesn't ask for access off the state system. They're a couple blocks back, and they have trucks going down the main system. And that retailer's in my meetings trying to convince us with their politician, we got to do this because I'll pull out. This is a killer for us. This is a deal killer. That's the retailer. I want to pull in the FedEx guy in that same meeting, the guy that brings more money into my state, and see what he has to say about that retailer's driveway, that he needs 2 on our main line. He's got side road access. It's interesting to think that way, but here's the bottom line. When I go to the Capitol right here, and I was just there a couple weeks ago talking to a senator, and after I spoke with him for 45 minutes to an hour, he said, you know, your last administrator used to always hound me on moving freight, safety, and I thought, you know, I always bark back at him. We need driveways because people have to have business. They have to live and feed their families. They need driveways. I had these training modules put together in Wisconsin, and I offer them to anybody here if you want to email me. But I was using parts of that training module, and he caught on for the first time in all the years he's been in the Capitol here that sometimes highways have lots of access, and sometimes they're designed not to have any access. What we all take as trivia, I mean, we know that. He didn't know that. He said, now I see what Dan was trying to tell me. I'm like, holy cow. So what I'm getting at is we need to get out and talk to the realtors, the builders, the politicians, and use what we have to show them the data that we're all experts on, and educate them, and the light bulb will go on, and I'll be surprised how many times they'll say, wow, I didn't know that. Now I see why you guys want us on the side road.
Yeah, I like the presentation this morning from the WSDOT person from the Southeast region. Even though he told us not to come to his session, I went anyway. I don't follow instructions. So, and he said, what I found in my experience in working in a number of states is when you compare the corridors with similar land uses that have well-designed access to those that don't, the ones with well-designed access and internal circulation and some of the other things we've all been preaching tend to be stronger and outlive the economic downturns, are more resilient than the ones with a lot of driveways. So when I've tried to convince people more driveways don't mean more business, I've used those comparative things like, and you have good examples here in Wisconsin to use, so I thought that would be another piece of information. I think a lot of it is just with our administrative and elected officials having one-on-one conversations, and with the property owners, all the people you said, Mike, to have good briefing packets, really easy information. Some of the charts and details that we look at here are important to us, but we need to synthesize it down into real simple things like Frank Browen said, that people remember 80% of what they see, 10% of what you tell them, 20% of what they read. So we really need to focus on not a lot of charts, but having really dynamic photos and examples that they can get it right away, because they're only going to have a few minutes of their attention, and so that they can understand some of the important aspects as they're making those decisions, instead of just hearing the appeal of an individual property owner. So
Let me add to Let me add to that, Brad, and do a shameless plug for NCHRP 25-47, which is our new NCHRP project on how to measure and communicate the benefits of access management and the value of access management. And so we're going to be working on those issues and coming up with some tools to help you better communicate these issues with your constituencies. And Karen Dixon's going to be working on that with me and Gary and Frank and Chris Huffman and Jerry Gluck of AECOM. So we'll be looking at costs and benefits and you think about the life cycle of those facilities, and Chris had mentioned that in his session. So if you're building a bypass on a bypass, you've got a major cost there, right? So the economics of it is so critical to getting these elected officials and the development community to better understand these issues, and then the qualitative examples as well. And so we're looking to you for information and ideas. If you have them, please share them with us on that topic. And we may be contacting your state soon to talk to you about it. So just wanted to mention that.
Thanks. I've got one more question, but time for a couple more from the audience first. Over here. Grant, just wait for the mic.
Well, I learned a lot from this conference and the future. I have a question about for the panel, for the committee, because the Mark present what's the scope for this committee is manage still, what is access management, is spacing, signal, median, driveway, and all physical elements on the street. So they are, I don't know, you guys think maybe explain the scope for the committee, consider access need for different mode, for future AVCV, and even some other things. I will say those are the access control, like no left turn, no U-turn, all these signs. When the MUTCD just know how to put these signs at location because they think that kind of movement is dangerous, it's unsafe. But once you put the no U-turn sign at the location, you kind of divert these people to other location to make a U-turn. Whenever there is a need, people will find a way to do it. So for my wrong way driving study, I found the people intentional going wrong way because they have no access to go the way they want to go. So there's some divided highway location. So this is just what I learned from you guys. That's my thought. We may consider expand the scope. Like Karen mentioned, we are not just a small retail group, and maybe this scope can be definition access management can be changed. I don't know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think from the research side alone, there's no doubt that a lot of good research, we've already done it on sort of the high level, what is access management and where are we headed. So I think over time, we're going to be expanding the scope simply because we're going to be starting to nibble at the sort of edges or branches that are coming off of that. So I think, we talked this morning in the previous breakout for the research stuff, driveways, curbside management, which we also talked about as it relates to CV and AV, is really not something that we as a committee have tackled a lot of. I think we've nibbled at it, but we really haven't delved into what it means or how it relates to what we do. But I think that there's going to be a lot of desire and need for that sort of research coming up. So I think from the research side, speaking for myself and I guess by extension the committee, I don't see us staying so hard and fast to the definition. That definition, as with everything else, is going to naturally change over time as we see needs in different, different situations arise.
Yeah, I think there,
Okay, yeah, Dr. Joe, one of the poster sessions that you were involved with, I believe, showed the fact that people wanted to get to a gas station and they really would just rather drive in the wrong direction on a high-speed highway than to make a U-turn, which reminds me of like a 1978, 1980, with the first access management course. The thing they kept harping on us was something called positive guidance. We may have forgotten a little bit about that. What does a driver want? A driver doesn't want confusion. A driver wants positive guidance. And our profession has gotten really sloppy about that. We are sloppy. We are not doing a great job to provide positive guidance to people in commercial areas. It's just much easier to let it go. We don't have to fight with anybody. Like you said, it's easier. Build a 5-lane section. We got a median opening. Just whittle away at it so people can get where they want quick. But positive guidance, and that poster session really drove it home. I'm glad that you got video of it.
Well, speaking of positive guidance, I guess my closing question for each of you would be, what is the sound bite? What is the one thing that each of you wants our audience to remember? If they only remember 10%, this needs to be part of that 10% that they hear. So what is the sound bite that each of you would take to them as the most important thing to do when they go back to implement, to advocate access management? What are the 6 things that they should remember out of this conference from each of you?
I'll start out by just saying what I want everybody to leave with is that access management is still a tool that I look at when the economy is down, and I don't think any one of the 50 states has an economy that's dumping money into access management. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they are. And we all know that when times are good, you're hiring the guy to cut your grass, and you're hiring a gal to come in and clean the house, or a guy to come in and clean the house. And when times are bad, you start doing those things yourself. So we have to figure this out. We don't have the money right here, but what I keep focusing on is these tools that we're all talking about, besides the median. You know, Gary talked about putting medians in. We have too many 2-lane roads up here. We're not going to put the medians in and make right-in, right-outs on all our highways. But what we can do is focus on the cost that access management really is. Yesterday I was talking to one of our leadership folks, and they said access management costs money. I said, well, I could argue that if you're telling us to put medians in, but by putting driveways on side roads, how does that? Well, it stops development. You need our training modules. So what I'm getting at is when you leave here, these tools are easy to do if you educate the folks you're talking to, the leadership of your organizations, and tell them about how it's going to save money. If you have, I don't know, I've heard different numbers, $600,000 per death. And then you talk about, Phil tells us how many people die on our highways. That's a real number. Access management is an easy way to maintain our highways and get money back. So that's what I keep focusing on as I listen to these presentations. I keep saying, I had to hire a guy to cut my grass. Now I got to do it myself. This is really important to know that these are cost savings. And if they think that it stifles development, you better talk to them and train them, because it's not the answer. It really doesn't. It helps development.
I think I tend to keep in mind, or want to keep in mind, that times will change a little bit. Mike brought up the driveways on the side roads, and somebody said earlier that about, I think it was Gary, about gas stations being destinations. I think I find from talking to people that there's fewer and fewer people that are simply driving by something and going, oh, I should go there. They're Googling ahead of time, or they're looking it up on their phone ahead of time. So they're going there whether we build the driveway on the side road or not. They're not going to just drive by this gas station. They may probably looked it up in advance, or fast food or whatever. And so, when we compromise, because we hear from elected officials or the public that that's the way it's always been done, at the end of the day, for those of us planners and engineers, and our primary goal is the public safety and make sure that we get people from, we want to get people from A to B in the most efficient manner possible. If it's efficient and they get in an accident, well, that's not all that efficient for them. So we need to make sure we're not losing sight of the fact that times are changing, and that people don't need some of the things they've historically thought they needed, and we can build that into this toolbox of things we have to provide for safer travel for everybody.
Thank you. Something that Phil said a while back has stuck with me, made me change some of my training, where we used to count up all the conflict points and argue about whether 2 lanes, 4 lanes has more conflicts. And the fact is, access management, and I'm quoting you, is conflict management. If you manage conflict, you're going to make it safer. You're going to provide more positive guidance for the driver, and you are going to save lives.
Never underestimate the value of education. And we found, some simple things like sending out a brochure on 10 ways to manage roadway access in your community to local governments and elected officials across the state of Florida had a huge impact. It even went national at APA. So simplify, and get the basic information out there. I love those examples of good and poor circulation, like you said. Common sense examples really can go a long way. So really, and get get that out to the local agencies.
You're not going to tell them how we came up with the 10 ways?
Yeah.
It was an idea from Cosmo magazine. If you read Cosmo, and I do, I love women's magazines, I admit. There's always that.
Don't remember this part.
Right. There's that, does he love me or does he not love me? And there's 10 questions to answer, and you can add it up. And we said, we're going to do this do you have good access management or bad access management based on the Cosmo model. Thank you.
Which actually was very popular.
I agree with Gary 100%. I want to compliment Mike down here, because you and Brad, right? You and Pat, or I forget, your team that's putting together your training modules. Yeah, that's excellent. The difference is the 10 ways was, a publication, based on a Cosmo model. I forgot about that. That was great. But you also took some of my wind is, what Gary mentioned about conflict management. I'd love to call our committee conflict management, because I can see us arm wrestling with the AV people over who gets to do the research on curbside issues. And all that is, as far as we're concerned, is going to be conflict. How do you manage conflict at the curb? How many people are arriving at the curb? How many arrive? Do we have enough Uber vehicles to service an elementary school that picks up 100 kids in an hour, and then turns around the same Uber vehicles go pick us up at 5 o'clock? It's going to be very interesting dynamics. But conflict management, to me, if you want to do anything else besides access management, just focus on conflict management. And it's a great way to figure out what your level of safety is. And other than that, I would recommend, remember the 9 million people I mentioned over the next 10 years? 9 million people, at least, actually that's a low number, are going to be involved in access-related accidents. They can't wait for AV and other excuses. They're going to be involved right now.
Well, the beauty of being towards the end of the list is they've all said the great things, and so I could just say ditto. But I will add one thing. When someone asks me what my research area is, I always tell them safety. But I do a lot of research in access management, and I still tell them I do safety, because I don't see a distinction. The best way to sell access management is to sell the fact that it's making our facilities safer for the users. Absolutely, it helps mobility, and there are other benefits. But the thing that's going to sell is safety. That's the thing that the upper management will understand. There's costs associated with safety we're going to save. So if we're trying to have the best, most efficient roadway system we can possibly have, and the circulating network of the land use adjacent to it, then enhancing safety is the best way to go. And so that's what we do in this room, and I think that we should be, I'm glad that that's our objective, because it's important.
Well, we're going to turn it over to Mark, but I would like a round of applause for our panel for today, but also for all the work they do in access management.